Hey, this is Pastor Jay Lee, and you're listening to the Daily Sabbath Podcast. Okay, so today we are doing an interview in a series of interviews on the topic of being spiritual but not religious. And sort of the background for this is I did a series of blogs and devotionals on the topic of being spiritual but not religious, and I got a lot of response. There was a lot of people who were really interested in this topic, people who were Christians, people who were not Christians. And so I really felt like there was something here, something to this topic that I wanted to look more deeply into. And, obviously I can kind of have my theories and my guesses of, why people identify as being spiritual but not religious, what they even mean when they say that. But I think it's always better to just ask somebody, right? Somebody who actually identifies as being spiritual but not religious, and just kind of ask the questions and hear their stories. And so my guest today for the interview is Katie Lister. She is a registered nurse, actually in Canada, our neighbor to the north. But she's also involved in women's groups around personal development for women. And she's soon going to be a fellow podcaster. And she's going to be starting a podcast around personal development for women. And Katie, she actually responded to a request that I put out in a podcasting group asking if there was anybody out there who identifies as spiritual but not religious and would be willing to just kind of share their story and let me ask my questions. And so Katie was gracious enough to respond to that. And so Katie, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Of course. Happy to be here, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and actually, just out of curiosity, could you share a little bit of what the podcast will be about and kind of what some of the themes will be that you'll be talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So just explored throughout the years what I'm the most passionate about or what my calling really is. And I absolutely just love to share wisdom and experiences and stories. And I find a lot of it is around self-improvement, how to step into your power, your purpose, or how to overcome self-limiting beliefs, or how to engage in proper self-care, or set boundaries with friends, and how to overcome a breakup, or all of these things that people go through. So just to really have a platform to discuss some of these real, meaningful things that happen in life. And it will likely be geared towards women, just to focus on that. But yeah, to just share personal stories, but eventually bring in experts in different fields as well. It'll kind of be wide ranging, and perhaps I'll niche down a little bit as it goes. But yeah, we'll start with that.
Great. So it sounds like I won't exactly be in the target demographic, but I'm still going to listen. So, but yeah, I'm excited for you.
Maybe you will be. Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right. So let's just jump right into it. We've talked a little bit about your story already, and so I know that you have some background already in the church. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing out, what is your background in Christianity, in the church, or just in organized religion in general?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I grew up in a Christian home. Both my parents are Christian, both their parents were. So I went to church starting as a young baby in a Baptist church until I was 10, and then an Alliance church in my preteen and teenage years. So yeah, definitely grew up in that space in a religious home for sure. Mm-hmm.
I see. And so what was kind of your experience with that like? Were you first of all, would you say that your family is pretty devout? Or is it they just kind of, it's part of their routine. It's not super important to our family, but, it's just something that we do and have always done.
Yeah, they're quite devout for sure. Go to church every Sunday, pray before meals, that's their values, and they stick with the traditional views of the church and of the Bible as well. So the classic typical, like, no sex before marriage and no, like, all of those, that was
Mm-hmm.
part of that very important, very instilled within me as a young child and beyond. So, yeah, to this day, it's definitely, definitely a huge part of their life. It's not just the, oh, go to church on Christmas and Easter, or
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
it's very, it's
Yeah.
of
It's a
their life.
huge part
Yeah.
of their lives. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
then what about for you? So, like, would you say that when you were younger, as a child or even as a teen, that you were also kind of devout, or how important was it to you, or were you always just sort of kind of on the fringe of it?
As a child, I definitely was. Like, it was a huge part of my life. I think probably because I didn't know any different, right? Like, your
Mm-hmm.
parents as a young child, they're your world. And I had really good memories of it as a kid, like being, part of the little kids choir, and all the Sunday school was really fun. And so that, and my cousins, it was a huge thing within the family. But as I grew older, it's like in my early teenage years, that's when I started to just kind of drift away a little bit. Like, I had friends at school and started questioning a lot of the values of the church, and didn't really sit well with me. So it was at that point that I kind of started to drift away a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was
Hmm.
kind of in the high school years, sounds like.
Yes, yeah, yeah, definitely. I felt probably around age 14, I felt like I was kind of living a double life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was still going to a youth group in the evenings, and really, I felt like some of the things were really resonating with me. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but I was like, yeah, yeah, like, I believe
Mm-hmm.
in this. But then I'd go to school or hang out with my group of friends that weren't religious, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, felt like, and I wouldn't share that part of my life with them,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I just felt like I was, and yeah, so that part was difficult. But then as time went on, I just resonated more with my other high school friends, and drifted away from the church.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it's not like you just disagreed with all of it. I mean, there was a lot.
No,
There was a
no.
lot to kind of the Christian teaching that you agreed with or liked, but it just over time, the things that you were kind of repelled by just kind of slowly overtook it. Sounds like.
Yeah, definitely. Like, just a lot of our values in society, not all, but a lot of them are in alignment with the church, right? So, like, some of the morals, like, do unto others as you would want done unto you, like,
Mm-hmm.
that was, I was like, yeah, of course. And so that was really, I still resonated with that. But
Mm-hmm.
some of the rigidity, like black and white thinking, like kind of the isolation of people that don't follow these set of rules, like those kind of things about the church really kind of repelled me, as you said, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you wouldn't mind kind of like, and I promise, like, even though I am a kind of a pastor, I'm not really practicing as a pastor currently, but, I'm like obviously this Christian person. I promise I won't be offended. But
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind actually just kind of going a little bit deeper into that part, like, if you remember, what were some of the specific things that you really felt like grated against you and sort of were repelling you?
Yeah. Anything like gay marriage, for example, like,
Mm-hmm.
it felt like, in my church at least, like that was very wrong. Like, transgender, switch, anything like that, all of
Mm-hmm.
that realm was just not accepted. As I mentioned earlier, sex before marriage. I really like the shame that goes to that. Abortions,
Mm-hmm.
like the anything. Those were like the main ones, at least as in my teenage years, that I just, and now of course still to this day, but I just couldn't shake past it. I'm like, how can this be wrong? Like, it just doesn't. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody's not intentionally hurting somebody else, I don't see how this can be wrong. And so those specific ones especially were
Mm-hmm.
really, yeah, really difficult for me to,
Mm-hmm.
like, I just couldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and then I had like a personal example, if you want to go there. When I was maybe 20 or 21 years old, I had my first boyfriend who was like a good friend of mine who actually happened to be a roommate of mine in a student house with a few other people. But anyways, and him and I started a romantic relationship, and we were really close. He was like my closest male friend, and I had found out that he had cheated on me, and I was absolutely heartbroken, like first major heartbreak ever, of course, and go home back to my parents' house and was up crying all night. And the next morning, my mom, I told her, and she just knew that this was the first time that she found out that I had sex before marriage. It was, and I just really needed her to be a mom, like to be just supportive in my like heartbreak, like one of the most painful experiences of my life. But instead, it was just so much disappointment and disapproval that I had done that. And she felt so, like she was clearly very disappointed in me, and and said that out loud. And it just, that really just kind of turned me off. I was like, how can this, and that of course doesn't necessarily represent the church itself. It's that, you know, every individual is different, but that value, like how can that be so strong? I'm like, in my opinion, I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong here, you know?
So, I mean, like, it sounds like that experience really exemplifies kind of your feeling about the church and Christians and sort of their, like what you say, the rigidity, right? Where it's like, here is a case where you are clearly hurting, right? You've just experienced something extremely traumatic. And rather than coming to comfort you and to, you know, to be there for you, she's just kind of fixated on this one thing, which is, wait, you had sex before marriage? That's wrong. And it's like, she can't get past her condemnation of that to be able to actually comfort you and be there for you. So, and would you say that kind of exemplifies what you kind of more of a general feeling about what maybe the church is like?
Yeah, definitely. Like, and I know that's not the case for everybody, but it just seems like that, like organized religion to me is like these set of rules and these sets of, you know, this is right and this is wrong. And it does seem like there's this shame, like people, another huge part was like, as I noticed in my family as well, this fear of sharing, like if you have sinned or done something that your family or the church wouldn't approve of, like it can be so isolating because at least in my experience, often people are not super open-minded about that or accepting or loving, and I know that's exactly not what it should be like, but that's just from my experience the way that sometimes the church has been. So there's a lot of you know, like everyone's putting on a good face and white picket fence, and there's no issues in the family because, you know, divorce is not an option, and like all these things. That was another one, divorce as well, like that. Yeah, that being not an option as well. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But anyways, yeah, just like, and I know that's not always the case, but that just really, I'm like, oh, can we not be honest and open with when we do go through difficulties, or if we do feel like, you know, if that, so that just kind of has rubbed me the wrong way as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, in your observation, I think it's kind of, there's this weird tension, right? Because on the one hand, you know, Christians, we preach that, you know, grace, right? That God, like Jesus came down to save us and to offer grace freely. It's not something that we earn. You know, all of us are fallen, and so we all need grace. And, you know, God is love. God is, you know, compassionate and all that stuff, right? These are all the things that we preach, but then at the same time, but it seems like a lot of times people feel like they can't really be honest about their struggles, even though, you know, one of our central beliefs is that we're all fallen. We all make mistakes. We all have weaknesses. And so we all need grace. But for some reason, that doesn't a lot of times seem to work itself out in the actual way that people practice their faith and can be honest with one another. And yeah, so I totally agree with your observation. I see that too.
Yeah, definitely. You've seen that in your experience, like. leading or being part of the church. Have you seen that, or is that something that's maybe more just from my experience here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been fortunate where the churches that I've been a part of, I don't feel like we're very judgmental kinds of places, though. I mean, I definitely have been a part of some in my younger years that were a little closer to that. And then the church that I'm involved in now is much more progressive. But yeah, but I mean, I definitely have seen and felt that pressure. And some of it I think is self. I mean, I don't know if I can blame it always on the church, but I think some of it is like self-induced, right? Where it's like, even though I know, what this Bible tells me, what Jesus says is that, that there's grace available no matter who I am, no matter what I've done, that I still sometimes feel that internal pressure of wanting to hide away my weaknesses and hide away my, right, like there's still that internal feeling of shame where maybe it's not necessarily because the church did it to me, but it's like almost like I do it to myself, and I don't feel like I don't feel safe enough to share it. So, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? Like, is it coming from the outside or is it coming from the inside? I'm not always sure.
Totally. Because we all, I think that's just a general theme, right? Like we all have this shame in us when we feel like guilty about something, or whether that's because of the what the church is.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think
so it could be either or.
Yeah, I definitely think sometimes it's just our own internal thing, but but at the same time, it is definitely true that there are a lot of environments, a lot of churches that, no, that pressure is coming from the outside where, no, this really is not a safe place. Don't show your true struggles because people are going to judge you. You are going to be rejected, and you will be ostracized. So, I mean, that's definitely true as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, was there sort of like a specific moment where you just kind of finally decided to rip the Band-Aid off and just be like, I'm not doing this anymore? Or was it just sort of a slow fade away from Christian faith and the church? Like, how did that go down?
It was definitely more of a slow fade. Mm-hmm. I think in like mid-teenage years, I kind of made that decision, but was still, fearful of my parents, what they would think, and my extended family. And so I kind of put on a show for them for quite a few years. So I would still show up to church at times and still just nod and smile at family gatherings. It wasn't until, in my mid-20s maybe that I had conversations with my parents that were quite heated and just about really where I stood and how I kind of rejected the church, I guess, and have my own different beliefs now. But yeah, I'd say more of the slow fade.
Okay. So you have actually had those sort of open discussions about it with your parents.
Yeah. I mean, they were a bit more heated back in the day because, I mean, my dad was just, of course, he's my father. I love him, but he just he's kind of one of those people that talks the talk a little bit, like has his own sort of set of rules. Like, yeah, he shows up at church, but he doesn't, he doesn't really doesn't really treat the cashier very well, or doesn't really isn't part of the community and kind of judges a lot of the other people. So I just got really frustrated by the hypocrisy of how he lived his life. It just didn't seem very in alignment with how the church would want him to. So I think I have had those conversations, and at first they were quite heated in terms of, arguments that, we have different values, but then now we definitely don't see eye to eye, like my parents and I, but I think they're aware that, I've said that I believe what I believe, and I think they're, deeply hurt and disappointed because of their values, but they also know that I'm an adult and I'm going to choose what I choose,
Yeah. I mean, I'm just really kind of curious, when you have had these conversations with them or do, I don't know if they happen currently as well, but in the past when you did kind of express no, I don't think I really believe this, and so I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to go to church anymore, and things like that. Like, obviously they're trying to probably persuade you otherwise, but like, I'm just kind of curious, what do they come back to you with, like in terms of like reasons why you shouldn't do this, like reasons why you shouldn't walk away from Christianity, or, what I mean? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like what are the reasons that they come back to you with?
Well, just like they say, oh, like, this is the truth. Like, you need, it's a bit preachy. And I think that's what also turns me off about it. But it's like, you gotta, this is the Bible is the truth. Like this, you're not going to go to heaven or have eternal life. Like this is like, we're really, concerned and just disappointed that, like, they're just like, there is no other way. Like this very black and white thinking, like, that like us versus them, like, you've just been convinced by the university or by people out there, like all those, that this way. So yeah, it's for me, it's not, it never really made me want to join again. And I know that's not everybody, but I know this is kind of veering off your question, but the way they live their life, it's not really exemplifying as much as what other people that I've crossed paths with that have gotten me more curious, like, oh, okay, maybe there is something there. But with my parents, it was just kind of like, oh, you're not going to go to heaven. It's kind of their biggest argument or thing that they come back to me with, and I'm like, cool, but I don't like I don't necessarily believe in that black and white kind of way of thinking.
So it's really, I mean, there's really not much more engagement beyond, this is the truth. You have to believe it. I mean, this is the word of God. And if you don't believe it, then you're going to hell. And there's really not much more engagement beyond that of like, I don't know, like, I'm just kind of thinking, like, if those conversations could have happened differently, right? Where maybe you would feel like, okay, now this is a conversation that I can engage with, or this is a conversation that would make me feel like, okay, we're really having a dialogue here. Like, I mean, maybe that's what it is.
Totally.
Like maybe there isn't so much of a dialogue about it with you.
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't much of a dialogue, or isn't. It's kind of black and white thinking, and like, you're right, I'm wrong. And there's not much of not much of a conversation, unfortunately, that could be had, that like, you can't just convince somebody to believe in a certain way by telling them that they're wrong, or explaining that you're right and that that's the only way. Like, there has to be more of a deeper dialogue and more meaning behind it. And so, I just didn't really get that from my family, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, maybe, in an ideal world, maybe there would be more of like, okay, so Katie, what is it that you believe? Tell us more about what it is that you believe, and why you believe that. Or maybe more like, well, I mean, so obviously you have questions about the Christian faith or the Bible. So like, what are some of those questions, right? Like, maybe in an ideal world, would a conversation like that be something that would be more conducive, you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think even you touched on the first point, like when you were just asking, like what do you believe, or what, like, the getting curious. I think that there was none of that. And I think that's so important, because it's acknowledging, like, my experience. Like, it's not making me feel all this shame or that I'm doing something wrong. It's just like, okay, like, what do you believe, and what made you come to that point? Or like, that would be so much more productive and engaging. And if anything, that would help me see eye to eye a little bit more, at least to have them understand where I'm coming from, or try to, or show empathy, and try to be, understanding of that.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that would have happened for you, or would happen. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe that type of dialogue is still possible in the future. Who knows? But
yeah, definitely. Maybe this conversation will inspire me to bring that up with them again.
Maybe
we have a bit of a better relationship now. So.
But I mean, it is kind of sad, because I think that's another. And I mean, I don't want to just crap on the church like that either, right? This is my family. A lot of
Yeah,
people use
totally.
this analogy where it's like, this is my family, even though there's parts of my family that I'm deeply embarrassed by, and like, there's like
Totally.
that crazy
Totally.
uncle, but it's still my family, right? And so, I don't
Mm,
want to just like crap on the church, but it is true. Like,
yeah.
I think that a lot of people, and maybe this kind of goes to, the type of, I don't know, education sounds so, stiff, but the kind of education that we give people in the church where, because, in my experience, people who are not really able to dialogue, but get more defensive are people who don't really know how to answer the questions or defend what they believe. Like not like in like
Mhm.
a, I'm going to win an argument sense, but just like, if somebody starts pushing back against something that you believe and you don't really have a good way of articulating what you believe or why you believe it, those are usually the people who get very defensive and then get very aggressive, right? Unfortunately.
Totally.
And so,
Totally.
I think a lot of times that is unfortunately what you see when you see people trying to dialogue around faith is people who are getting very defensive.
Yeah, definitely.
So, okay, you've, finally kind of in your high school years, sort of kind of taken a stand and made a decision that, yeah, you know what, I don't believe this and I'm not going to really do this anymore. And so could you just kind of tell me about like what was the sort of the status of your spirituality at that point? Were you kind of still like, well, I'm still spiritual, but I'm just not really into the church thing? Or was it like I wasn't even spiritual at that point, like it was just, more of an atheist or
Yeah.
something like that? Like what was the status at that point?
Yeah, I never identified myself as an atheist, but for a while I was like, yeah, I'm agnostic. I don't even know what that means these days. But just like I mean, I just was younger, just didn't care. Like I knew in the back of my mind, I'm like, I know I'll have to revisit this, like the bigger meaning of life and what's out there and all that.
Yeah.
But like at that time, I was like, I just want to, do good in school and hang out with my friends and do my hobbies and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
party and
Yeah.
and just live my life and not care about any of this. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so that's kind of where I
So
was
it just was
at
just
that
wasn't
point.
that big of a concern.
No, no. I mean, I know that's not for everybody, but at that age, like I think that's quite can be quite common. It's like, yeah, this just
Yeah.
isn't a concern for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not like you were taking some sort of active stance. It's just that it just didn't seem like much of a priority to you at that point in your life, and you were just worrying about doing other things and living your life.
Yeah, definitely. I was just like, you know what, this isn't resonating with me anymore. It's not important to me. I don't really agree with it. But yeah, I'm just gonna
Mm-hmm.
like I still showed up like Christmas and Easter and important times. I would go to church with my family. I wasn't
Uh-huh.
like totally
Yeah.
like rebellious and rejecting it in that way. I never had this a big traumatic experience or anything other than, maybe the one I briefly said with my mom with that
Yeah.
incident. But that like there wasn't anything that I was really turned off by, like
Mm-hmm.
one particular incident that I would refuse to go, but it was just like, yeah, this just isn't. I would go and I just wouldn't pay attention, or I'd
Mm-hmm.
roll into church hungover on a Sunday morning. Sorry
Yeah.
to tell you that,
I can't believe you told me that. No, it's very
but
common.
yes, I was just like, all right, I guess I'll show up. But it
Yeah.
just wasn't a priority for me for those years when I was
Yeah.
a bit younger. Yeah.
Yeah, what you don't want to think about is the fact that other people are doing that as well, but there are people that are up on the stage, and secretly they're like, "Oh man, I'm so hungover." You know. Now, but yeah, so okay, and I think that's an important thing to bring out because I think a lot of the other people that I am interviewing about this, I think one of the kind of reoccurring themes though is that for a lot of them they did experience some sort of deep hurt from the
Mm,
church or from organized
mm,
religion. And so
yeah.
for a lot of people, I think that is part of their story where, yeah, they experience something traumatic. But for you, it really sounds like that's not the case at all. But it really just came down to you didn't agree with what was being taught.
Yeah, exactly. So not one incident, but there's just been these tiny little, you know, things throughout my life. I didn't agree with what's being taught, and then these tiny little, what I feel like maybe judgments, or
Mm-hmm.
when I feel preached at, or that like what I'm doing isn't right, that have occurred when I've had conversations with people that are faith-based or in the church or whatever, that I just, yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like, yeah, turned me off from that for sure.
Yeah. And, actually, if you wouldn't mind, if we could kind of stop, because something that you said that I think is maybe something that a lot of people might say is like, you felt like you were being preached at, right? And,
Mm,
I mean, and I guess nobody really likes being preached at.
yeah.
But I think for me, let's say as a person of faith, right? I mean, obviously, one of the things that I would hope to be able to do with people in my life, especially people who, yeah, maybe they don't believe in God or they don't have any kind of faith, is I would want to be able to share this part of my life and what I feel like is something really important. I would want to be able to share it with them in some way. But I also at the same time, I'm kind of one of those people where I'm always afraid of being perceived as preaching at somebody or being judgmental or something. Like I go in that direction where I'm
Mm,
like, I'm paralyzed by not wanting to make a misstep in that direction. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, I don't know, like what to you is being preached at versus just having a conversation with somebody about what you believe, right? Like, is there any way to tell
yeah.
somebody about what you believe, like at least in a spiritual sense, without it being perceived as being preached at?
Oh, absolutely. Like I think just sharing, like if you completely believe that, deeply passionate about something, like
Mm-hmm.
just sharing it, like sharing what you believe and why you believe, and that's that's beautiful. Like my roommate's Christian. I've had some very amazing conversations that have opened my eyes up to the faith way more than a couple of years ago before I was living with her. So that is absolutely different than I think being preached at is like when, uh, for me at least, feeling
Mm-hmm.
judged or like being told what to do and what not to do. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not about, okay, this is what I believe and what I know to be true, and these are examples in my life why I cannot deny this, and like that's beautiful. I'm like, wow, there's if somebody says that to me, like if you were to share stories about your faith, like I'd be with open ears and would listen. But if you start to tell me how what I'm doing in my life is wrong, or how you don't agree with it, or that's going against what Jesus says or the Bible says, or
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm like, okay, that's kind of, to me, like that's crossing a line, and that just makes me
Mm-hmm.
like want to totally go the other way, because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, you're not. It's that sharing and living by example as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're in alignment, I think that's huge for me too. If somebody is in alignment as well with what, literally practicing what they preach, but in the
Yeah.
sense of just like sharing, and the actions, the way they live their life is in alignment with that, then I think that's really a much, that exemplifies that much more than
Mm-hmm.
telling somebody what to do and what not to do,
Yeah.
and what to believe and what not to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I see. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe part of it is kind of subjective to the person and to the relationship, because I'm just kind of thinking like it's if you have somebody who you're really close to, right? Like you guys are really really close friends. Sometimes in a close relationship, you might say something to that person where it's like, hey, I see this going on in your life, and I don't know if it's the best for you, right? Like,
Oh,
do you feel, yeah,
absolutely.
like, do you feel like
Yes,
maybe it
yes.
depends on the relationship as well?
Oh, totally, totally. And I definitely, and I think it's just, yeah, it depends on the relationship, the closest. And I think that's huge. Like if you're being a good friend or close to somebody, is it's important to recognize like when, if you're noticing something that might not be good for them, and to point that out. Like that's part of, a little bit of tough love for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when it's like, if you're taking what your values are and your beliefs and then projecting them onto somebody else, or
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, when it gets a little bit like, Okay, that's
Yeah.
feels a bit preachy. Yeah,
Hmm.
I could. I don't know. I could give an example if, if
Yeah,
that
sure.
helps.
Yeah.
But
I love an
yeah,
example.
yeah. So for example, um, I recently did um, a therapeutic like plant medicine session with a counselor. So I've used like mushrooms a few times in a therapeutic setting, and I was doing this, and I had told my roommate a week prior just to let her know that I wanted some quiet time after, and I hadn't really gotten a chance to talk to her about it until right
Hmm.
like an hour before I was going. And she and her fiance came up to me and started asking questions. She was more open-minded, so I didn't feel that way, but then her fiance was much more preachy about it, like in the sense of like, oh, and God, like you're opening up your mind to this potential evil that can come in,
Hmm.
um, and like I believe in the word of God and this kind of stuff, and that just kind of was like again, I was just like, okay, like I didn't ask for your opinion. This is
Yeah.
really important to me. You don't know anything about it. You're not asking me why I'm doing this or why it's important. You're just coming in and like and this is also from somebody that doesn't know me that well either. So
Yeah.
in that case, I was like, all right, like that just made me that just changed even the dynamic of our relationship too. Like I was just like,
Hmm.
no, like that's not okay. So that's kind of a
Yeah. Yeah.
recent example, I guess you could say.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we won't spend our whole time talking about this, but I think this
Yeah,
is
no, no,
just
no.
personally kind of interesting to me because, yeah, I'm always kind of,
Yeah,
me personally, I'm always sort of walking on eggshells about what is okay to talk about and
totally.
not talk about, right? And so,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
and so in that example, yeah, maybe if it had been a different person, maybe it's somebody who you had a closer relationship with, and maybe if they had said it differently, because
Yeah,
like
different person at different time as well. It's like I'm about to go into this thing.
yeah,
Like maybe
like
we could have had it. Like this might have. Like I don't.
yeah,
like like maybe a week ago we could have had a good discussion, but an hour before I'm about to do this,
uh,
like that's not like.
yeah. Because I
Yeah.
mean, if I was going to play like sort of, I mean, I hate using this term, but I don't know what a better term for it is. But
Devil's
like, if
advocate.
I was going to play the devil's advocate, right? Like, if I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
a
yeah.
person who really believed that, like doing drugs is like some sort of gateway that opens you up to spiritual attack or something like that. Like, if I was a person who really believed that, and then you were about to go into, do something having to do with drugs, like I could see how that person would perceive it as, because I care about this person, I have to say something, don't I? Because I don't want them to, you know, step into something that's going to open them up to some sort of spiritual attack or something like that, right? So, I mean, just to kind of give the other perspective of probably what they're thinking. I mean, it sounds like though, like in terms of kind of like what you said before about like kind of the way that he said things and the way that he approached it also sounds like it was not the best.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally see, and that's where they're coming from. But yeah, and again, and there's a fine line, and we all make mistakes, but
Yeah.
in the way we communicate at times. But yeah, definitely, I think you touched on something earlier. It's just those why questions, like getting
Mhm.
curious, and asking why, and yeah, just I guess in this specific example, having a certain relationship with the person, and then also
Mhm.
timing. I think really being cautious of when is an appropriate time to have those kind of conversations and when
Mhm.
isn't. I think we could all
Yeah.
remember that as well. Hmm.
So then at some point, it sounds like you kind of moved more to a place where you identified more as sort of a spiritual person, right? Rather than this person who was just kind of agnostic and like, it's not really top of mind. I'm just living my life. But at some point, it sounds like you moved into more of a spiritual place, a spiritual but not religious, but a spiritual place. And so, could you just share a little bit about like, yeah, when did that happen and how did that happen?
Yeah, I guess a couple years ago it started. Again, kind of slow fade out and slow fade in. So it wasn't like this big, event or anything either. It was just these, in the back of my mind, I always knew I can't deny that there's some sort of higher power. There's something that cannot be explained by science alone,
Mm-hmm.
like the serendipity, like the, you know, little coincidences that happen in life, even miracles that cannot be explained. Like there's just something
Mm-hmm.
out there. And so I think what really happened was a couple of years ago, I just felt a little bit more grounded in the way I was living my life, and felt like, and just had allowed a little bit more space, like started engaging in more journaling and reading and taking time. Like I've started doing yoga and meditation, and I just started reading more books, I guess, that were
Mm-hmm.
spiritually focused. I've got intrigued about and done a little bit of plant medicine, and I just sort of was drawn to, okay, like having faith in the universe or a higher power or the divine or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I still can't, unlike Christianity, that something isn't as well defined for me, or not, it isn't yet, but definitely I am more drawn to that, because I think that there's just so much that cannot be explained. And I also think that you can't tap into like your true purpose and your true calling if you don't believe in like in a higher power.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think that was the big catalyst. Was there's something in me that's like so trying to figure out, what am I here for? Like why am I on this earth? Like what is it? What are my gifts? What's my calling or my vocation?
Mm-hmm.
And in part of that journey of discovering that, like I like can't go down that path without tapping into the spiritual part of me, or the spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
It's because if you're so pragmatic in the way of thinking, it's not,
Yeah.
at least from my experience, it's not possible. So
Uh-huh.
a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Because, yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that, even though you kind of left your Christianity, the faith thing behind, it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that the catalyst was that you still had sort of this sense or even longing within you for meaning and purpose, greater meaning and
Yes,
purpose. And
yes.
anyway, I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it also kind of sounds like because it doesn't seem like you were like, thoroughly investigating all of these questions, these, essential questions to the meaning of life and all that stuff and philosophy. But it seems like you already sort of had an instinct and an intuition that trying to find that greater meaning and purpose apart from some sort of spiritual some sort of spiritual truth, like you kind of already instinctively knew that was a dead end and there wasn't really an answer there, and so that kind of opened you up to exploring more of the spiritual side.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think as you mentioned, I don't think I did it purposely. I wasn't researching or,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, but anything that I was drawn to, like reading a lot of books, for example, like there's always, at least I was drawn to the ones that had this spiritual component, and that really, really resonated with me. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the catalyst, I think, was trying to find deeper meaning and purpose in, I guess, my own life, rather than
Mm-hmm.
the meaning of life, or the big
Yeah.
big on a broader scale. It's more just for me, like what's what is
Yeah.
my purpose, and then it's now has expanded to a
Mm-hmm.
more broader spiritual sense.
I see. And and if I could kind of just to get a little bit more personal with it, like that sort of journey of wanting to discover, like, yeah, what is my purpose, what is my calling, like, do you feel, let me put it into context, because I feel like some of the other people that I've talked to, that their sort of journey into more of a spiritual path, was the catalyst was maybe some sort of pain or some sort of
Mm.
hardship or some sort of tragedy. Like, obviously, it doesn't sound like that's what you're describing, but I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of when you say that you did have this sense of wanting to, find sort of like a greater purpose and greater meaning. I guess I'm just wondering if that was coming out of any sense of like yeah, I even though I was living my life and stuff, like I felt like maybe there was something missing, or it's not exactly pain, right? But kind of coming out of a sense of lack, or was it just more like, no, I just think that there's probably got to be something more to life, and so I'm going to look for it, you know?
Yeah, I think the sense of lack is the best way to describe it. I think for me, a lot of it was career, just navigating, what do I want to be doing
Mm-hmm.
with my time. I think we all just spend most of our time working. That's just the way
Yeah,
our society's set up. So,
yeah,
like, what am I really meant to be doing here? And that, like, here as in on earth. And so it's, it started with like, oh, what should I do for work? What do I like? What do I not like? I explored many different avenues within my career and still am, but a bigger in that journey has been that, like, oh, okay, what is my greater purpose? And then that gets more spiritual, like, okay, I'm doing, like, say, whether I believe I'm created necessarily or not, but I do believe that we all have our own special gifts inside of us, and it's like we're meant to use those gifts and to share those with the world, and we're doing a disservice to both ourselves and everybody else if we don't do that. And so in order to discover that, to listen to your intuition, to listen to your heart, to be drawn to what lights you up, like, there, at least for me, like, it's, you have to have faith, like,
mm-hmm.
faith in something, faith in the higher power, faith that if you do take a risk or take a leap or try something, that if it's really what you're meant to be doing, or if you're following your intuition, that you will be taken care of. And that is something, yeah, new for me in the last couple of years. I never used to think like that, but
Mm-hmm.
because I have this more deeper spiritual connection now, that's something that's part of my belief system now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's very much a work in progress.
Yes, definitely. Like, there wasn't this big pain point, like you mentioned, with other people that caused me to find some deeper meaning. It was just yeah, it's a work in progress. I
Yeah, like
can't
even
clearly define it,
yeah,
but
like you just have
yeah.
growing, maybe it's a sense of like growing beliefs in different things,
Yes.
even though
Yeah,
they're not
exactly.
clearly defined. And it sounds like you're also open to the fact that it is like you're on a journey, and it's not like what you currently believe. You're not saying like this is what is this is what I think is the truth of the universe, but it's just, at least to this point, this is what I've got so far, and there may be more, as I keep going. Like, you're open to the fact that your beliefs may continue to grow and evolve and change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm totally open to that. That, like, if, I have an experience or learn something new, and that could evolve, that could change. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. If we could just kind of stay here for a second, like, I mean, I guess you have been sort of kind of articulating some of what you have now come to believe, but I'm wondering if there's any more that you could sort of like, it's almost like if I could ask you for sort of a progress report in terms of your journey of spirituality. Like, I mean, maybe this is sort of the pastor theologian in me. Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, what are some of your current beliefs about, God, or I don't know. Yeah, I don't even know what the
Yeah,
questions are.
yeah.
Like a
What am I
God,
current
yeah, a creator, about the purpose of your life, about whatever. Like, what are, if you were gonna try to put your finger on, like, sort of, I think this is kind of what I believe right now. Like, would be curious to hear what that might be.
Yeah, I think so. I guess I just don't believe in one specific God, but I do believe that there's this higher power. There's something
Mm-hmm.
out there that's more that we can't see or explain. I I believe that like that the universe, like we're all connected, like humans, animals, plants, like every living being has consciousness, and so that's, I think, a huge part of my belief system now. Is like I think our society is very human focused, and that we're kind of the center of everything. And so I believe in the consciousness, I think, of all of our earth and plants and everything that's alive there. And I know that's really, really vague, I guess, now, but it's just, it's like, it's
everything is connected.
Everything's connected, and that, so that we need to, in terms of for First Nations or Indigenous cultures, I think we have a lot to learn from them on like how connected they are to plants and using those as medicine and like some certain rituals and healing. Like there's that component, and they have a lot of spiritual practices that I think are really valuable. And so for me, I think it's as you mentioned, definitely a work in progress, but I'm very open to learning about these different spiritual traditions and teachings from whether it be different religions or cultures, and just kind of choosing or just what really feels right to me. So it's hard to define at this point, but I think it will be a continually evolving process and something that I'm excited to continue to explore more.
Yeah. Well, if I could say that those two beliefs that you currently have, Christianity is not out of the running yet, so I just throw that in there. I would say the Bible is in alignment with those two statements that you just made. So
there we go.
It's not out yet.
So it's not
the pastor in me has to say that.
Yeah, you may convince me otherwise. We'll see.
We're not disqualified yet. Something that we had spoken about was that you were also maybe interested in or somewhat drawn to the idea of reincarnation and maybe possibly karma. And so I was wondering if you could maybe say something about kind of your current thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably more karma would be, it's a concept that I've always just kind of lived by. Like, I mean, it's kind of like the golden rule in how I see it, but just really like doing good, and like good things will happen. And if you're intentionally harming others or not doing good unto others, like, not that something's out to get you, but like it kind of what goes around comes around a little bit. So I do. It's funny though, because everybody has their own judgment, of course, of what's good and what's bad, and so that's a little bit difficult. But it is something that's just kind of fit in my mind. And then reincarnation. It's a concept I'm open to. I wouldn't say I necessarily believe in it, but then at the same time, I do think there are some old souls and some young souls, and it's something I'm open to. I'm like, that could definitely, I could see how that could be true. I am not diehard absolute believe that could be true. I guess that's kind of how I am with everything. It's hard for me to, with 100% confidence, believe anything to be true. So with that,
I mean, which is good, because in a sense that's good, right? Because you're an honest investigator of these things. I feel like you're not pre-committed to anything.
Totally, exactly. So that concept, I'm like, I could definitely see that, but I'm not 100% convinced either.
So I mean, that's just kind of just interesting to me, because I think a lot of times when I think of somebody who is spiritual but not religious, sometimes I feel like it's very ambiguous. And so it's nice to be able to kind of hear you articulate a little bit. And, obviously it is somewhat ambiguous because you're still figuring it out. You're still figuring out what you do believe. And so, but it is kind of nice to hear sort of like what are some of the things that you have gained, or what are some of the things that you have come to embrace and believe, even if they're still forming and not completed thoughts yet. So, something that I'm kind of curious about is, so for like a Christian, we have sort of this authority at the center of our faith, or at least for like an evangelical Christian, and which is supposed to be like the Bible, right? And so at least the idea is that what we believe arises out of the teaching of the Bible, and that, we check what we believe against the Bible to see, okay, are we in alignment with it? So that kind of sits as sort of the center. We have sort of that primary source to go to ask, like, okay, what do we believe is the truth? And so I'm just kind of curious, for somebody who is, obviously not attached to the Bible or any necessarily like sacred text or anything like that. Like for you, as you're sort of on this spiritual journey, and as you're kind of discovering things and learning things and, adopting some things, and what is your guide? Like, how do you decide like what you believe is true and what you don't believe is true? Like, I'm just really curious, like, how that works.
Yeah, great question. I guess I don't really have one specific guide. I think a
Mm-hmm.
huge part for me is just internally, like my intuition. Like, okay, does this feel right? Does this not feel right? Like listening to that inner
Mm-hmm.
compass is huge for me. And then just it's a variety of books or uh, texts or lessons that just really resonate with me. That yeah, I don't really have like a specific one guide telling me that what's right or what's wrong or what exactly to believe in. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
will figure that out as as time
Yeah.
progresses. But right now, it's that kind of inner knowing. Like, I think a big part of my journey is listening to that inner voice and really just believing that rather than what's on the
Mm-hmm.
outside.
Yeah. Not
Hmm.
relying on an external source to tell
Exactly.
you what is true or what is right, but inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, do you ever, so like for Christians,
Hmm.
like for Christians, like we have sort of this built-in belief from the Bible, which is that sometimes our inner voice can't be trusted.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's like this whole, like the doctrine of sin and all that stuff. But, to throw aside kind of the theological language, just this sense of like, I'm not totally reliable, right? That sometimes I'm wrong, or sometimes like, I mean, like sometimes I'm just, unreliable. And so, like, I think for the Christian, there's kind of like this built-in sense of like, I shouldn't totally trust my own judgment all the time. Right? And so I'm just kind of curious for you, do you ever have that? Because it sounds like right now, and like you said, it could change over time, but right now primarily the compass is like your intuition and your feeling. Does this feel right? Is there any kind of sense of that as well for you, where it's kind of like, yeah, but maybe I'm not always right, or maybe my intuition is not always the best? Like, is there any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, especially if I'm talking to a Christian like yourself, like I'm like, oh wow, that's true. What if I'm not right? um, and I think, again, I think this will develop, and I think for so long I was too worried about external validation
Hmm.
and the external sources that I've needed to kind of go the other way to like listen to this
Yeah.
inner voice of mine. And yeah, it definitely is a concern because like we're so like our neural pathways are built to believe like we have our this belief system based on our experiences, and that could
Hmm.
be we could totally be biased and skewed. And yeah, so to have something that's really a guide would be phenomenal in terms of to be able to go to that, especially when facing big decisions or struggles in life, challenges, but there's not been this
Mm-hmm.
one guide that I've been able to find. But yeah, it's definitely something that, it's a good point, Jay, actually, that like, okay, maybe I can't always trust myself, but
Uh-huh.
but at the same time, I guess I'm just using my own life experiences in the past when I've really listened to my gut and or
Mm-hmm.
trusted that intuition. Like it's only led to good things, both for I guess for myself, but then that has the ripple effect of good onto other people as
Mm-hmm.
well. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's just what I'm going with for now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think previously when we had spoken, and you kind of mentioned this earlier too, that your roommate is actually a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but that that had been a positive experience. And so I'm just kind of curious, like what that's been like interacting and having a relationship with a Christian that is positive, and how that any of that has played into sort of your spiritual journey.
Yeah, she's definitely a positive example, and I think that mainly it's because she's very accepting and loving and open-minded. Like she absolutely has her beliefs, and but she lives completely in alignment with them. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just so, that authenticity is, I think, is just a huge value of mine. And so just seeing that, okay, like what she talks about and what she believes in, that's really how she's trying to live her everyday life. And then just hearing her views on some of the Christian point of view, like we just have to think of the concept of, okay, we just have different views. Like I have a different worldview than she necessarily has. And so we may not see eye to eye on certain topics. Like, for example, I know this is different across different churches, but like homosexuality, for example, is still something that she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't believe is right, whereas it's something that
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely don't agree with. Like I do think that it's and so, but like
Yeah.
hearing her explain from the Christian perspective and her worldview, I don't agree with it, but it was in a way that I'm like, okay, I can understand where you're coming from your view. And so it was just one of
Mm-hmm.
those, just being able to have those conversations in a non-judgmental manner, and seeing the way she lives her life and the beautiful community that she has around her. And that's just really, it's had a positive impact on me for sure of how I view the church. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think you had mentioned before that some of kind of what you see, not only in your roommate, but also what you see in sort of some of her Christian community, has had an influence on kind of how you've also begun to move into some of your practices and kind of opening yourself up to, kind of engaging other women in these like groups and things like that. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, she's always been really devoted in the sense of every morning she would wake up, a couple hours before she needs to go to work, or have her quiet, sacred time for her spiritual practices in the morning. And I think it's something, just being around that every day in that environment has, I've kind of adopted those practices for myself, obviously in a different way, but taking that
Mm-hmm.
time to be with myself, like absolutely no technology and no influence from anything, and doing a yoga practice and meditation and journaling, like that's been a huge practice of mine that I think I've been influenced by that from her. And then, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
sense of community, that's something that I think is so strong in the church, and it's something that I like, especially around the shared values. And yeah, it's something that I'd realized that was lacking a little bit in my life. I've,
Mm-hmm.
I've have tons of friends, but in terms of ones that can get into more of these deeper, more meaningful conversations, or have similar values, and to get together on a regular basis and show up consistently. And so having those, I mean, that's Christianity. There's different community groups that people meet on, of course, on different days of the week, or obviously going to church on Sundays. But for me, I was like, oh, I can create this. There should be something like this that doesn't need to necessarily be faith-based. And so that's part of what has inspired me to create these women's groups where we talk about like more intentional conversations. And it's really another thing really is like living an examined life. Like that's something that we had some great conversations about, like, you know, at the end of the day, like it's not about what you did, but it's about if what you did mattered. And so that has really stuck with me. And whether it's from a Christian standpoint or not, like I think just living an intentional and examined life is so important to me. And it's one of those things that I want to help inspire others to do the same. And part of why I'm starting a podcast and doing these women's groups is because of that. And so that may look a little bit different from my perspective and point of view, but it's definitely, I think, been inspired from being around her and her faith as well, for sure.
Yeah. You can see the value in the practices, even if you don't necessarily believe in the God and, you know, agree with the doctrine. But yeah, you know, I mean, because even for myself, like, I mean, this is not exactly the same as you, because obviously I'm still Christian, but, you know, sometimes I look back on some of my past church experiences, you know, where, you know, maybe it was a little bit more like who I am now. I wouldn't completely agree with, you know, their perspectives on things. They're a little bit more conservative than I would be now. But I still go back and I see like there's so much beauty in some of those traditions that they have, and you know, just like the family and like the community, like you described, the gathering together, the sharing of your life, you know, and having these kind of like really deep and meaningful conversations on a regular basis, you know, asking people like, hey, what's really going on in your life, you know, these days, you know, going beyond the superficiality and yeah, so there's so much beauty that I see in that. And so I don't know. I guess I like the fact that you also kind of see that as well and pick up on that.
Oh, beauty. Absolutely. And the sense of community, even going a step further, like really showing up for each other too. Like when somebody's going through a hard time, or even like a new baby being born, you're a dad, right? So you just like people.
We just experienced that. So we just had a baby a couple months ago in the church, you know, coming around us, bringing us meals and things like that.
Exactly. And that's just something that's not in our current society, like just not really, unless you're part of a church. I don't know if that's really, it's not a very common thing in like a typical group of friends or something. Like it's really cool that the community gathers. If you need something or any type of life event, like they're there, you have support. Like so that part's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Katie, thank you so much. I know that we had a very wide-ranging conversation here, and I really appreciate that you were willing to kind of just share very honestly and openly your journey. And I also appreciate your humility that, you know, you acknowledge even that you don't have the answers, that all of this is sort of a work in progress. All of this is tenuous, and some of what you believe might change. But I think that it was, you know, the things that you've shared are going to be really helpful for a person like me and, you know, people who are Christians in the church, maybe just to have a better sense of, you know, the ways in which maybe we hurt people and also maybe in some of the ways in which we are actually very strong and we have really beautiful things to offer the world, but they just maybe get covered up by some of the ugliness that comes out of the church as well. And so, you know, I feel like what you shared today is just such gold, so valuable for us. So I really appreciate you taking time.
Aw, thank you so much for your kind words. Yeah, definitely. I hope that people can learn from it and just understand different perspectives and recognize what's good and what can be improved upon. And sharing these stories that's just how we all learn from each other, right? So it's been great having this conversation.
The closing song for this episode, Take Me to New Heights, is by Omaira Caban. For more music from Omaira Caban, you'll find a link in the episode description. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share this episode with a friend or on social media. If you'd like to connect with Pastor Jay, you can visit dailysabbath.com or our Instagram account at dailysabbath.
In my heart, I planned my course, but you knew my steps since the very start. Since the start, you know my dreams, you know my fears. You only ask that we draw near, that we draw near. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. I want to be like you. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. I want to be like you. 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 So let your light shine in the dark, to overwhelm the hardened hearts. Not be content with what we are, but try to raise the bar. Mold my heart from start to end. Take me places I can't comprehend. I can't comprehend. Mold my heart from start to end. Take me places I can't comprehend. I can't comprehend. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. I want to be like you. Take me to new heights, take me to new depths. I want to be like you. 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 Take my life, make it reflect a broken journey. You're one day perfect. Take my life, make it reflect a broken journey. You're one day perfect. Take my